Yes, my new plaintiffs have really pompous-looking screen caps. All right, so we're back. Mr. Langton is regaling, you could even say, to Boswell a collection of bon mots that Boswell missed because he didn't get to meet Johnson this time. So these are Johnsonian bon mots, a collection. Talking of the minuteness with which people will record the sayings of eminent persons, speaking of which, a story was told that when Pope was on a visit to Spence at Oxford, as they looked from the window, they saw a gentleman commoner who was just come in from writing, amusing himself with whipping at a post. Okay, amusing himself with whipping at a post. Pope took occasion to say, "That young gentleman seems to have little to do." Mr. Beauclerk observed, "Then, to be sure, Spence turned round and wrote that down," and went on to say to Dr. Johnson, "Pope, sir, would have said the same of you, if he had seen you distilling." Johnson said, "Sir, if Pope had told me of my distilling, I would have told him of his grotto." He would allow no settled indulgence of idleness upon principle, and always repelled every attempt to urge excuses for it. A friend one day suggested that it was not wholesome to study soon after dinner. Johnson said, "Ah, sir, don't give me to such a fancy. At one time of my life I had taken it into my head that it was not wholesome to study between breakfast and dinner." Mr. Beauclerk one day repeated to Dr. Johnson Pope's lines, "Let modest foster, if he will excel, 10 metropolitans in preaching well." Then asked the doctor, "Why did Pope say this?" Good question. Johnson said, "Sir, he hoped it would vex somebody." Dr. Goldsmith, upon occasion of Mr. Lennox's or Mrs. Lennox's bringing out a play, said to Dr. I'm sorry. So earlier I said this was Langton recalling to Boswell what he missed because he didn't see Johnson this whole year. That's actually incorrect. For whatever reason, Boswell has decided to put everything, almost, it seems, that Langton ever told him of Johnson in this section. So this is, from earlier, because we know that by 1780, Dr. Goldsmith is dead, and we're talking about him. But I believe there's also Langton anecdotes sprinkled throughout the rest of the book as well. Anyway, let me go back and read that again. Dr. Goldsmith, upon occasion of Mrs. Lennox's bringing out a play, said to Dr. Johnson at the club that a person, Richard Cumberland, had advised him to go and hiss it because she had attacked Shakespeare in her book called Shakespeare Illustrated. Johnson said, "Did not you tell him he was a rascal?" Goldsmith said, "No, sir, I did not. Perhaps he might not mean what he said." Johnson answered, "Nay, sir, if he lied, it is a different thing." Coleman slyly said, but it is believed Dr. Johnson did not hear him, then the proper expression should have been, "Sir, if you don't lie, you're a rascal." All right, that was a little confusing for me. I'm not going to repeat it. I don't think it's worth it. His affection for Topham Beauclerk was so great that when Beauclerk was laboring under the severe illness which at last occasioned his death, Johnson said, with a voice faltering with emotion, "Sir, I would walk to the extent of the diameter of the earth to save Beauclerk." One night at the club, he produced a translation of an epitaph which Lord Ellenbach had written in English for his lady, and requested of Johnson to turn into Latin for him. Having read Damina de North et Grey, he said to Dyer, "You see, sir, what barbarisms we are compelled to make use of when modern titles are to be specifically mentioned in Latin inscriptions." When he had read it out once out loud, and there had been a general approbation expressed by the company, he addressed himself to Mr. Dyer in particular and said, "Sir, I beg to have your judgment, for I know your nicety." Dyer then very properly desired to read it over again, which having done, he pointed out an incongruity in one of the sentences. Johnson immediately assented to the observation and said, "Sir, this is owing to an alteration of a part of the sentence from the form in which I had first written it. And I believe, sir, you may have remarked that the making a particular change without due regard to the general structure of the sentence is a very frequent cause of error in composition." Some inside baseball right there. Johnson was well acquainted with Mr. Darcy, author of a treatise on agriculture, and said of him, "Sir, of the objects which the Society of Arts have chiefly in view, the chemical effects of bodies operating upon other bodies, he knows more than almost any man." Johnson, in order to give Mr. Darcy his vote to be a member of this society, paid up an arrear which had run on for 2 years. On this occasion, he mentioned a circumstance as characteristics of the Scotch. "One of that nation," said he, "who had been a candidate against whom I had voted, came up to me with a civil salutation. Now, sir, this is their way. An Englishman would have stomached it and been sulky and never have taken further notice of you. But a Scotchman, sir, though you vote 19 times against him, will accost you with equal complacence. After each time, and the 20th time, sir, he will get your vote." Talking on the subject of toleration one day, when some friends were with him in his study, he made his usual remark that the state had a right to regulate the religion of the people, who are the children of the state. A clergyman having readily acquiesced in this, Johnson, who loved discussion, observed, "But, sir, you must go round to other states than your own. You do not know what a Brahmin has to say for himself. In short, sir, I have got no further than this. Every man has a right to utter what he thinks truth, and every other man has a right to knock him down for it. Martyrdom is the test." There's a footnote here that says, "Here Lord Macartney remarks, a Brahmin or any caste of the Hindus will neither admit you to be of their religion, nor be converted to yours, a thing which struck the Portuguese with the greater astonishment when they discovered the East Indies." "A man," he observed, "should begin to write soon. For if he waits till his judgment is matured, his inability, though through want of practice, to express his conceptions, will make the disproportion so great between what he sees and what he can attain, that he will probably be discouraged from writing at all." As a proof of the justice of this remark, we may instance what is related of the great Lord Granville, that after he had written his letter giving an account of the Battle of Dettington, he said, "Here is a letter expressed in terms not good enough for a tallow chandler to have used." Talking of a court-martial that was sitting upon a very momentous public occasion, he expressed much doubt of an enlightened decision, and said that perhaps there was not a member of it who, in the whole course of his life, had ever spent an hour by himself in balancing probabilities. Goldsmith one day, that rascal Goldsmith, brought to the club a printed ode, which he, with others, had been hearing read by its author, George Marriott, in a public room at the rate of 5 shillings each for admission. One of the company, Burke, having read it aloud, Dr. Johnson said, "Bolder words and more timorous meaning, I think, never were brought together." Talking of Gray's odes, Johnson said, they are forced plants raised in a hotbed, and they are poor plants. They are but cucumbers, after all. A gentleman present, who had been running down ode writing in general as a bad species of poetry, unluckily said, had they been literary cucumbers, they had been better things than odes. Yes, sir, said Johnson, for a hog. I guess he had to be there. His distinction of the different degrees of attainment of learning was thus marked upon 2 occasions. Of Queen Elizabeth, he said, she had learning enough to have given dignity to a bishop. And of Mr. Thomas Davies, he said, Sir Davies had learning enough to give credit to a clergyman. He used to quote with great warmth the saying of Aristotle recorded by Diogenes Laertius, that there was the same difference between one learned and unlearned as between the living and the dead. It is very remarkable that he retained in his memory very slight and trivial as well as important things. As an instance of this, it seems that an inferior domestic of the Duke of Leeds had attempted to celebrate his Grace's marriage in such homely rhymes as he could make. And this curious composition having been sung to Dr. Johnson, he got it by heart and used to repeat it in a very pleasant manner. 2 of the stanzas were these. When the Duke of Leeds shall married be to a fine young lady of high quality, how happy will that gentlewoman be in his Grace of Leeds' good company. She shall have all that's fine and fair, and the best of silk and satins shall wear, and ride in a couch to take the air, and have a house in St. James's Square. Oh boy. Now, if you're curious about the rest of that, here we go. Here's a footnote. The correspondent of the Gentleman's Magazine in 1792, page 214, who subscribes himself Ciolus, furnishes the following supplement. A lady of my acquaintance, Mrs. Thrale, remembers to have heard her uncle sing, Sir Thomas Salisbury, sing those homely stanzas more than 45 years ago. He repeated the second thus. So it's a little different. She shall breed young lords and ladies fair, and ride abroad in a couch and 3 pair, and the best, etc., and have a house, and etc. And remembered a third, which seems to have been the introductory one, and is believed to have been the only remaining one. When the Duke of Leeds shall have made his choice of a charming young lady that's beautiful and wise. I guess wise and choice used to rhyme back then. Choice, wise, or wise, choice, wise. I don't know. She'll be the happiest young gentleman under the skies. Or is wise rhyming with skies there? I don't know. I think they're all supposed to rhyme, aren't they? Kind of an AAAA thing. Let me start from the beginning again. When the Duke of Leeds shall have made his choice of a charming young lady that's beautiful and wise, she'll be the happiest young gentleman under the skies, as long as the sun and moon shall rise. And how happily shall that what gentleman be in his Grace of Leeds' good company. It is with pleasure I add this stanza could never be more truly applied than at the present time. To hear a man of the weight and dignity of Johnson repeating such humble attempts at poetry had a very amusing effect. He, however, seriously observed of the last stanza repeated by him that it nearly compromised all the advantages that wealth can give. It nearly comprised, rather, not compromised, sorry. It nearly comprised would mean, it engulfed, it encapsulated. An eminent foreigner, when he was shown the British Museum, was very troublesome with many absurd inquiries. Now there, sir, said he, is the difference between an Englishman and a Frenchman. A Frenchman must be always talking, whether he this is Johnson talking, I guess, now. Whether he knows anything of the matter or not. An Englishman is content to say nothing when he has nothing to say. Johnson's unjust contempt for foreigners was indeed extreme. One evening at Old Slaughter's coffee house, when a number of them were talking aloud about little matters, Johnson said, "Does not this confirm old Merinel's observation? For anything I see, foreigners are fools." Ooh. He said that once, when he had a violent toothache, a Frenchman accosted him thus: "Ah, monsieur, vous estudiez trop." I do that. All right, let me see if I can look up what that means before I forget, because I always forget to translate the... It's funny how much they hate the French. They certainly expect everybody to read the French. Huh? Studious trop means... okay, that makes sense. So it means sort of like, I'm not sure you study too much, I guess. Maybe you know something. Maybe you know French more than I do, but that's what it seems like. It's Google is telling me. Having spent an evening at Mr. Langton's with the Reverend Dr. Parr, he was much pleased with the conversation of that learned gentleman, and after he was gone, said Mr. Langton, "Sir, I am obliged to you for having asked me this evening. Parr is a fair man. I do not know when I have had an occasion of such free controversy. It is remarkable how much of a man's life may pass without meeting with any instance of this kind of open discussion." We may fairly institute a criticism between Shakespeare and Corneille, as they both had, though in a different degree, the lights of a latter age. It is not so just between the Greek dramatic writers and Shakespeare. It may be replied to what is said by one of the remarkers on Shakespeare, that though Darius's shade has prescience, does not necessarily follow that he had all past particulars revealed to him. So I guess these are just direct from the horse's mouth right now. We're directly quoting Johnson. Spanish plays, being widely and improperly farcical, would please children here, as children are entertained with stories full of prodigies, their experiences not being sufficient to cause them to be so readily startled at deviations from the natural course of life. The machinery of the pagans is uninteresting to us. When a goddess appears in Homer or Virgil, we grow weary. Still more so in the Gretchen tragedies, as in that kind of composition a nearer approach to nature is intended. Yet there are good reasons for reading romances, as the fertility of invention, the beauty of style and expression, the curiosity of seeing with what kind of performances the age and country in which they were written was delighted. For it is to be apprehended that at the time when very wild and improbable tales were well received, the people were in a barbarous state, and so on the footing of children, as has been explained. It is evident enough that no one who writes now can use the pagan deities in mythology. The only machinery, therefore, seems that of ministering spirits, the ghosts of the departed, witches and fairies, though these latter, as the vulgar superstition concerning them, which, while it is in its force, infected at least the imagination of those that had more advantage in education, though their reason set them free from it, is every day wearing out, seems likely to be of little further assistance in the machinery of poetry. Little does he know. As I recollect, Hammond introduces a hag or witch into one of his love elegies, where the effect is unmeaning and disgusting. And one more paragraph, I guess. The man who uses his talents of ridicule in creating or grossly exaggerating the instances he gives, who imputes absurdities that did not happen, or when a man was a little ridiculous, describes him as having been very much so, abuses his talents greatly. The great use of declinating absurdities is that we know how far human folly can go. The account, therefore, ought to of absolute necessity to be faithful. A certain character, here he named the person, but Boswell doesn't tell us, and nor does Langton. As to the general cast of it, is well described by Garrick, but a great deal of the phraseology he uses in it is quite his own, particularly on the proverbial comparisons, obstinate as a pig, and etc. But I don't know whether it might not be true of Lord John Boyle, Fifth Earl of Cork and Orrery, that from a too great eagerness for praise and popularity, and a politeness carried to a ridiculous excess, he was likely, after asserting a thing in general, to give it up again in parts. For instance, if he had said Reynolds was the first of painters, he was capable enough of giving up, as objections might happen to be severally made, first his outline, then the grace and form, then the coloring, and lastly to have owned that he was such a mannerist that this disposition of his pictures was all alike. All right. Well, I guess Johnson doesn't like tall tales or fishing. We'll continue tomorrow. Till then, bye from Boswell.